Welcome to Blue Collar Mystics, the under-the-hood approach to the depths of human consciousness. So many mysteries, so little time, so many big words. That's why we aim to take the mystical and make it practical, usable in your everyday life. And you know, we want to hear from you. We want to hear your story. What happened when you started asking yourself the real questions? Like, who am I? What is this? Is it a hologram? Is this some kind of weird cosmic joke? Hey, these are the questions that we are trying to get to the bottom of as we explore the final rabbit hole together here as Blue Collar Mystics. Welcome everybody to Blue Collar Mystics. We are live streaming on YouTube. We're somewhere on Facebook. I don't know, it gets confusing. And then definitely on Rockfin. I set that one up manually every single time. It's great to see everybody. I'm really excited. I have a very awesome guest, a friend of the show. He's been on. We've done some really cool podcasts together, and I've enjoyed watching him grow. Very brilliant, very talented, and very knowledgeable when it comes to all things esoteric. The great and powerful Paranoid American. Welcome, Thomas.
I'm a grower, not a shower. So that's kind of in line with everything else in life.
Well, as my friend Nate Ball says, is there a third option?
Yeah.
So no, we're excited. I wanted to do something a little bit different and leverage your skills, your natural stuff that's in your wheelhouse. If you guys don't know, Thomas has some really cool different streams that he's done series wise. He's got Occult Disney. I was just over there breaking down some movies with, he's doing a Kubrick series on some of the symbology and Kubrick stuff. And I thought, hey, let's just try like a surface level, sort of a basic fundamental spiritual symbolism podcast. I know you know this stuff so well. I've learned it a little bit through some osmosis and some different books. I'm certainly not an expert on it. And so I'm really excited to just kind of get started, and we may take this series and do a couple more or another one or whatever it necessarily requires. So thanks so much for being here, and thanks everybody in the chat. What's up, y'all?
Yeah, thanks, man. And I think this is a great topic to sort of get started in, because I think this might be the first entry point that I had into caring about what you might call like occult or like esoteric information, things that are a little bit under the fold that you have to kind of actively seek out more than things that are just kind of presented to you. And I guess a great way to start this, the two things that introduced me to the whole world where I started caring about, the very first one is I found a copy of Secret Teachings of All Ages online. Manly Palmer Hall, the OG, he's up there looking down. But there was another one that I came across in the early 2000s that took it to the next level, because when I came across Manly Palmer Hall, it was more of like a self-helpy area. Like I didn't get introduced to it through conspiracy or anything like that. It was just like, oh, this is the breakdown of all the ancient gods and, the ineffable name of God and Tetragrammaton. Like it felt like a mythology cliff notes in a way. And it was cool because he broke things down in like simple science. But the big one for me, bro, is there was a video that I think you can still find online on YouTube, but it was a talk by Michael Sarion in the 2003 Conspiracy Con, and he has this presentation called The Subversive Use of Sacred Symbolism in the Media, and that thing blew my freaking sock. Like I went and I bought every DVD he had ever put out, like got the whole Origin and Oracle series, everything. But I still, to this day, I mean, that was 20 years ago, right? 2 decades later, I still think that that's my go-to to give someone like a full breakdown of why you should care and some of like the more nuanced little details of it. But yeah, look up that Michael Sarion speech. And it's, in my opinion, it might even be better than the DVD series that he puts out. That's like a 80-hour version of it. That one little clip, I think it's like 40 minutes long or something. But man, and I'm happy to go into like some of the specifics that he brings up in that. But yeah, Secret Teachings of All Ages and Subversive Use of Sacred Symbolism in the Media by Michael Sarion.
Yeah, I just dropped that link in the chat, everybody. So go ahead and click that and bookmark it. Check it out. I saw that years ago too. And honestly, it blew my mind. And I was watching some of Mark Passio's stuff too, which if you watch Mark Passio's stuff, it's essentially a lot of the same points and different ideas about some of the different symbols. But yeah, I totally forgot about that. But Michael Tessarion, is it Sarion or Tessarion? I don't even know.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't know, but yeah, like I found that somehow, stumbled upon it, and it blew my mind. Forgot a lot about it, but yeah, I guess that is a great place to start. Why don't we just dive in?
All right. Well, I mean, I guess the concept of the sacred use of symbol. I'm going to butcher the name because it's got so many damn S's in it. But the premise of that video that I took away, at least, and I was in school at that time doing art design, graphic design, and stuff. So it was just the perfect storm of what I was researching and what I was like watching at that moment. And he was describing how these car companies, Mazda and Altima and like the Chevron and some of the Cadillac wreath, like all of these things are basically allusions to these ancient gods. And part of you's like, all right, whatever. Who cares? Yeah, cool,
Right.
cool name, Mazda, Altima, whatever, cool names.
Right.
But he's making this argument that if these have, and I'll paraphrase all of this, like he says it better or different at least. But the way I understood it was that we almost have like a genetic memory. And even if it's not a literal genetic memory, because science can't prove that, there's almost like built into our traditions and the stories we tell and the artwork that we consume, all of this, it has some of the DNA of these like ancient archetypes that were established. So if there's even a 0.00001% chance that someone will drop an extra 10 grand on your car versus the other guy's car, if you just name it after a god, or like some kind of mythological chariot or something, if that is even a modicum of a possibility, you can bet your wallet that a capitalist will be like, yeah, name it after the god. So that's the most superficial version, is that people can just use symbols that are already going to be programming you. Doesn't mean they have to own it. It's not like Mazda now owns all of mythology and like now they've got the gods that are sitting in your car next to you. It's just that, hey, this commands some sort of authority and respect. And that's the most obvious version, because it's like Mazda literally being the name of a god. I think it's Zoroastrianism, but that being the name of this god, it's baked in. But now peel away and say like, well, how about that checkerboard floor? How about those columns? Or how about the way that this cube is rotating in a certain way? All of those things also might be like tapping on some reptilian brain version of logic that originally built. So that concept fascinated me as soon as I saw it.
I even have like an old book on my shelf that's just like basically, and I've flipped through it. I've actually never read it, but it's like a way more modern thing, and people using imagery in advertising. And essentially there's little things that you can do that sparks the brain. One being like, if something's off about the photo, then it'll make you stop and like subconsciously, like if someone's legs like super long, or or like it has a weird bend to it or something like that, like some of the AI hand stuff.
It's like really engagement farming.
Yeah. Right. But there's also a lot of sexual symbology as well that's embedded in a lot of the graphic images and different things like that, even just on a subconscious level, and that doesn't even have any symbological meaning. But there's an argument to be made that the symbols themselves we have carried through like generational or passed down, or as they're ancient, and that they actually speak to some part of us on a subconscious level.
I mean, you could make an argument that just like lewd images are symbolic, because there's a lot of like the Vesica Pisces, right? The little Jesus fish, but really just the intersection of these two circles, and it I mean, that has been theorized as just being a woman with her legs open, and that's what the Vesica Pisces is, and that's why it's like the place where Jesus came out of, literally, right? It makes way more sense logically for that. So, and I think that also shows how powerful symbols can be. Literally, a circle and another circle, you put them close together where they're not intersecting, now you got one sexual symbol that people might see, and you push them in a little bit, and like, so if two circles can conjure up like some of the most potent imagery ever, like if you convince the caveman, like, hey, every time you see these two circles, right, like you could have a Pavlovian response to that would be very real. It wouldn't require any sort of like mental mind programming or conditioning or anything. In fact, there's a lot of old stick figure cave drawings where like you can tell where the men and the women are because they knew how to put two circles next to each other. So that being sort of like a crass, simple version, but really that is some of the OG versions of symbolism is they'll bring up cave paintings because that's the first time that we've got record at least of humans taking some abstract thing that's not the thing that they're actually talking about, but they're conveying it in a different medium in 2 dimensions instead of in 3 dimensions or even 4 dimensions if you're talking about like a big battle scene that kind of like plays out. And that in my mind is like the real building blocks of symbolism. And really the advancement, if you consider symbolism a technology, the advancement of that technology is like every other technology. Over time, it just gets more efficient and smaller and simpler. And that's sort of, and it appears simpler, but there's more going on behind the scenes a little bit. And I think that that's kind of a healthy or a rational way to look at symbolism outside the woo-woo stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, think about it. These images are impressed upon our psyches from such a young age before we can even speak or really even interpret them. So there's very likely some subconscious impact, at a deep level. It's just like you said, some Pavlovian response. Like it doesn't even have to be a caveman. I mean, look around. You know what I'm saying? Like take a walk through the mall if there is still one. And like people are, basically foaming at the mouth at this point. You know what I'm saying? Like we're not all that advanced. It's funny we think we are just because we have technology, but it might be, you could make the argument that these symbols are even more impactful now that we have less tools to really guard ourselves and have any sort of intellectual defense.
When now we're surrounded by symbols, like I mean, if I just look around my room, like every product has got some logo, and the logos has someone that had an art degree that was like, we're going to put some mythology into this, to where it's like, it's so ubiquitous that it almost loses a little bit of its meaning in a way, right? Because there, like, I've probably got so many products in this room that are named after ancient gods just because that's what people do with it. But it speaks because I think originally it was very potent and it had an actual like practical impact. And even if we get outside of like products that are being sold to you by companies, like just for yourself, symbols can be really, really important. And I guess another less woo version that I kind of look at symbols are mnemonic devices. Like if you can just train yourself that when I see that logo or this like circles again, right? We had the 2 circles close to each other. If they intersect, these are 2 different things. But add a 3rd circle. If you got 3 circles, you can make the silhouette of Mickey Mouse, for example. And now you can just present these 3 circles overlaying each other to someone, and then they'll think of their favorite movie. They might hear Mickey's voice in their mind. They might think of a time they went to Disney World. Oh yeah, my grandparents brought me. Oh, I miss my grandparents. Like, look at how many potent things that get brought up, and literally someone just showed you 3 circles, and they could just be like, oh no, I didn't mean Mickey, you know what I mean? But if you had them in just that right way. And it's also kind of fascinating to think that someone can own putting those 3 circles together. Like, you better not put these 3 circles together the way I put those 3 circles together.
Right.
You're gonna look into some problems, Buster. Like, that blows my mind, and I think is just more evidence, if I'm making some kind of a court case, of how damn potent these symbols are. It's like, if I put all this effort into this magical sigil, like, you can't just use that. That's my magic. Like, I did all the work there.
That's right. This is Led Zeppelin. You start, you got Zoso, and you got the different images and symbols that they had. Each one of those members of that band. That's kind of my introduction, was in college listening to Zeppelin, and like each one of the members of the band had their own symbol. I see a symbol, I just start hearing the Immigrant Song. You know what I mean? Like, it's programmed deep in me. I'm ready to rage. You know what I mean?
And that shows that how useful symbols are to evoking memories. So if you intently, so by default, like the Mickey Mouse ears, right? I don't know if many people sat down and they're like, okay, I'm going to memorize, like, whenever I see these 3 circles, think of Disney. Like, that just happens naturally because it's kind of being put onto you, right? That's the real world kind of mind control marketing, is that when I show you 3 circles, you're going to think of all these movies. But imagine that if you sat down and you acknowledged how powerful symbols could be, and you put your own meaning in behind these things, so that now when you see it, you can conjure up something that you intended for, you to conjure up. I mean, a lot of examples, right? You see like a Christian cross, you see the Vesica Pisces, the little fish, you see the dove with the olive branch, and you see the all-seeing eye on the back of the dollar bill, right? The Great Seal. Some people see that and they get like the ick about the founders, you know? Some people see it, they just see money. So, you know, there's all sorts of different responses to it. So I think the real potency and a great place to start here on symbolism is being conscious that like these aren't, in my opinion, these symbols aren't embodied with some kind of power that's just being emitted at you. It's just saying like, hey, remember everything that this thing represents. So whatever you've conditioned yourself to conjure up when you see these things, that's what conjures up. So if you can train yourself to think of useful stuff that comes up when you see all of various stuff, now all of a sudden like symbols can be useful to you and they stop being like a bad thing or a mystical thing.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah. Well, it's taking the power back when you do that. You know, it's like I know a lot of people who are, you know, whatever their beliefs are certain things. And then, well, when I first got into conspiracy stuff, I would see that Illuminati eye and I'd be like, oh, gross. You know, this is terrible. It's slavery and the capstone and all this stuff. And it's like, well, if you redefine it, it can mean so many different things. And it's really about creating your own BS belief system, reality tunnel, whatever, back to like Robert Anton Wilson, who I know we both talked about a little bit, and basically saying, you know what, like I'm going to use my intent. It's like I was reading a passage today from the Reality Transurfing 78 Days. And essentially he says that if you allow people who write horoscopes to dictate to you what your fate is going to be, then you're basically allowing them the ability to control your life. Instead, you can take the power into your own hands and decide what these things mean for you. And that's a great place to start in understanding, you know, what a lot of these symbols mean. A lot of them are mathematical, geometrical. And so based on that, like, how are we going to define them? I think that's a really, really good place to start. This is somebody in this chat says, all seeing eye, your third eye, or your soul. There's a lot of ways to see this, right? I've thought about it as your internal eye as well. Like whenever you're conjuring up images within yourself, you're hearing from your own intuition, your inner eye, it could mean that to me. Like it meant that to me, you know, whenever I've looked at it that way, it meant, you know, being dominated, by the 33rd degree, Mesa. It's meant that when I've looked at it that way, it's meant many, many different things. So that's an excellent point.
Well, and the original name for, I mean, I guess there's a lot of different variations of that, but if we're talking about the actual grand seal on the back of the dollar bill, it's the Eye of Providence, and that actually has like positive connotations originally, right? And it's inside of this little triangle. It's got this like little halo around it. It's kind of like the eye of God in a way, and it's supposed to be like looking down on, like, hey, like we've got a friend, in up in the sky in case we need him. Like he's overlooking this great project of his. So like, all rest assured, that was kind of the original idea, and then it just turns into a security camera, and it's just like following you around the store, kind of, which has a different connotation to it. But and I guess you can trick yourself into like, every time I see a security camera, it's just going to remind me of how much God loves me. Like you could do that. You know what I mean? Like it would be weird. And I guess that brings up another really good point about symbolism, is that it increases in its potency exponentially, like orders of magnitude, if more than just you assign meaning to it, and if more than just you assign the same meaning to it. So, like, I guess that's kind of also why like a circle by itself, that could be potent if you train yourself, that the circle means, circle of life, or in like masonry, circle can represent the compass and like the circumscribing your life within bounds and all this stuff. But that requires lots of abstract thought. So let's go to the highest form of symbolism, in my opinion, which is biased, but like comic books or just like paintings or artwork or illustrations and stuff. Essentially, it's just a bunch of circles, right? And lines. Just like if you're looking at computer games or computer graphics, at one point, it was just a bunch of triangles. But, our eyes can only make out so much resolution. So eventually we can just compare it and it forms. I mean, I'm going to explain how the freaking eye works here, but the idea is really just that at a point, your brain's like, oh yeah, this isn't real. Okay, what do you really want to see right now? So, and I think that this might also be not in like the physical form of like those magic eye paintings, right? Because I've never been able to see one. So I think that it's all a big conspiracy. But some people claim that you stare at them long enough and you see like this thing come out. But if you didn't know that, if you didn't know that you had to like stare at it and do this certain thing in order to do it, you would live your entire life just looking at these weird abstract pattern paintings, these weird tessellations, and just be like, yeah, that's not my thing, and not even realize there's this like whole extra world that's built into it. So I think that's a similar way that you can kind of see symbols.
Yeah, that's cool. Like, are you talking about like the sort of Monet paintings where there's like,
Like if you stare at it long enough, you'd see like a 3D rendering of something. It was
I've
in that
seen,
Mallrats movie,
yeah,
and it's
yeah,
like it's a schooner, you idiot, or whatever. It's not a sailboat.
yeah. I've seen them. It's been a long time. I remember those though back in the
See, I've,
mall in the
I've
90s.
never actually seen one pop out. Like I know, but that's kind of how symbolism can work. And another really good example, I guess, and this probably came from Secret Teachings, but I remember going to church all the time. I grew up Roman Catholic, so we went to at least on every Sunday and on like major holidays, but sometimes more than that if you're being bad. But I just remember like all the stained glass paintings and all the little sculptures. Like Catholics go all out, bro. They don't pull out the stops. You know, they like get the gold trim on everything. And years later, after I like kind of stopped caring about that whole aspect and all the like religious symbolism, and then Manly Palmer Hall's writing like, "Oh, did you ever notice that some?" And I'll just make some stuff up because I don't have it top of my head, but it'll be like, "Yeah, they were washing like Jesus's left foot in this painting, and there's a bird on his like right shoulder, and because it was the right shoulder and not the left shoulder, it means this." And like, and when I first came across that, it's like, what are you talking? Whatever, bro. Like you're just making this stuff. But then you go and start looking at it, like, how long did it take for someone to actually sculpt the original version of this? And they spent, like maybe even years of their life working on this thing. So it would almost seem less likely that they just, oh, we'll just throw this bird on the right shoulder. Who cares? Shoulder's a shoulder. Who cares? So at a certain point, the people that are putting all this time and effort, which kind of leads me full circle back to like the graphic design thing, that like if you're the one that's actually making this thing and you know about symbolism and you know about mythology and all this stuff, there's really no downside to spend an extra 5 or 10 minutes and put some kind of symbolism into something consciously versus not doing it at all. And not just because you're trying to mind control the masses or anything, but because like some of these symbols, they might be tapping into an archetype that people relate to at some deeper level that we can't even communicate through words or logic alone.
Absolutely agree. Yeah. Well, the idea of egregores or pendulums, which I think there's evidence for, even though it might be, to a lot of people, maybe, I don't know, maybe not as easy to prove, maybe a little bit, I don't know. But the fact that like a bunch of people see a certain thing and it means a certain, like the golden arches of McDonald's or like whatever, like we're talking about cars or whatever, like everyone, you see that and you can immediately hear the jingle, what it means. You can taste the burger. Like it becomes this, like it's a pendulum or egregore, the more people that tap into that. I'm reminded of Rick Rubin's new book, which is fascinatingly, it's a great book called The Creative Act. It's very simple. I've got it over there. I could pull it, but like on the cover, it's literally just the circle with a dot in the middle, the sun sign.
The monad, yeah.
That's it. That's all it is. And it's like interesting that this genius dude who's, so cutting edge and been part of all these records that were like so out of the box and abstract and new and fresh is going to use like the oldest symbol in humanity.
Yeah, dude. It's nuts too, because it's an eye, it's a boob, it's a record, it's a CD, it's anything that you freaking want it to be, which is what makes that one so powerful. And honestly, the more I say, I don't know how much I'm just drinking the own Kool-Aid of this stuff, but it's kind of a genius thing to put on the cover of a book if someone's expecting, like the world out of you. Because like I was saying before, a circle by itself may be a symbol, but it's just way too vague. And a dot by itself, well, that's even more vague. Now we're just like talking about one-dimensional, existence. But you put a freaking dot inside a circle, especially if it's right in the middle of that thing, now all of a sudden you're tapping into not just like ancient philosophy, but very likely, like the first weird monkey amoeba fish god, whatever you think, crawled out of the sea, stared at the sun too long and burned a hole in its retina, and maybe that's just baked into us for the rest of the time, right? And
Absolutely.
that like there's something really hardcore about that. And it's just dot and a circle, and all of a sudden you've got all these different things you can apply to it.
Yeah, it's like one of the oldest symbols that there are. It's like an astrological sign meaning the sun. I mean, what is older than that? Like it's older than many alphabets and things like that. So these symbols, which alphabets are made just of symbols all the way through that we pronounce into words. So I mean, if we were to just break that down, those themselves are just symbols. So it's pretty interesting. So maybe we can talk a little bit about like the foundation of I also would love to know, like, when you're taking an art class, because I've never taken, like, other than school visual art, do they talk anything about this, when as you start to learn graphic design and you start to learn about symbols, or is it just kind of like a lot of times you think happenstance or synchronicity or coincidence that a lot of graphic designers are using these symbols? Are they tapping into something consciously, or is it just kind of like it comes about?
Uh, Honestly, I don't know. It's a great question. I remember that when I was in school, the closest that we got to explicitly saying like, here's some rules or like here's some secret tricks that'll make your art better or more recognizable. And most of it just boiled down to Gestalt theory, which was just like form and composition and continuity and repetition. And like it's the same thing as when you're doing photography and they'll be like, oh, use your lower thirds, or take shots of everything in the thirds. It's not necessarily like always going to work, but if you have no idea what the heck you're doing and you don't even know where to start, that'll at least give you like some bumpers, right? It'll give you like a training wheels in order to do that. Usually if you're got a decent comprehensive art program you're going through, there'll be like a mythology course or two and maybe even some world history that's basically for the same ends. Although I would say in typical Pavlovian public education Rockefeller fashion, like the way that we're taught currently is so compartmentalized that you might go and learn all these things, but it will be rare for you like in a vector design class, or you're doing like a Photoshop class or painting, and then them to also be telling you about ancient mysticism and like logos as you're designing actual logos. You know what I mean? Like very rarely for that to happen. It would usually be a teacher going off script or just a really badass teacher that's dropping all that. So I think that some people that really love artwork and they want to understand like what the masters did and how they were able to make things that last for generations and centuries and more, that's when you're like, oh, they were usually incorporating some kind of mythology and gods. Like plenty of people drew really great still life artwork and portraits that you can still find around, but the most artwork that seems to have like huge stay powers like millennia tends to revolve around either gods literally or like gods at the time, like huge large figures, you know what I mean? So and that itself, they in a weird way, like these great artworks become symbols. The photo of like David touching the finger of God or just barely touching it, right? He's like, pull my finger, and he's like, oh, no. But that like now if you can just see the symbol of two fingers touching, that itself is such a powerful symbol that also multiple people, millions of people probably could all identify and link to the exact same thing, which inherently makes it just more potent because it's so clear. Like if I were to show you that exact symbol and you didn't go right off of ET, like if one of them wasn't glowing with like a little bulb on it, you'd kind of understand like, oh, that's mankind trying to touch God or not being able to touch God. And so I think that that's a weird like feedback loop, right? Where he created something new, but based it on all sorts of symbolism that he was taught. And now the thing that he made turns into a symbol for generations to come.
Hmm. Yeah. What do you think about the Mona Lisa? Thoughts on that?
Mid. She's mid.
Mid.
Yeah.
So
No, so that one I think was more like it's got like mathematical complexity built into it. The concept that wherever you stand in the room, and I guess I was lucky enough to either see a fake reproduction, but they said it was the original at one point, but like you can literally stand anywhere in the room as long as you can see it, it can see you. And that I think is almost like a flex by the painter. That's sort of Da Vinci saying like, I understand this medium and the laws and the rules of perspective so well. Like, I'm just going to show you these cool little optical illusions and tricks with some of this stuff. So
wow.
I never really considered that to be um uh like artwork that was based on the lady, you know what I mean? It was everything but the lady, which in itself is kind of symbolic because he's baked in this idea of perspective. And actually, perspective itself is a fairly new invention, or at least like a common thing that everyone was able to use. You can pinpoint almost the moment in time when artists worldwide were like, oh, here's how you draw something in 3D. Not everything has to just be like postcards on top of each other, like this 2D art aspect. And this is almost the concept of understanding just a circle or the monad or this like sign of the sun, and then opening up to like the next dimension in symbolism, which would be like the platonic solids. And now it's like a sphere and not a circle.
Okay.
And then you understand like the multiverses in a way, right? Like a small circle is just the tip of a sphere as it passes through this plane. So that's kind of the next step up. Like once you understand the most rudimentary basics of 2D symbolism, a logo on the screen or the arches in front of you or the little circle and the dot on Rick Rubin's badass book cover, which I'll have to check out. But that's like the most surface level stuff because it's also just eyesight. We're not talking about your sense of smell. We're not talking about music or anything. We're just talking about shapes and colors. So yeah, I would say next step becomes like these platonic solids.
Yeah, that's cool. I love that. Yeah, and I think that Joe Roop was on here because he's talking about the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life and the different colors of the Sephiroth.
Classic Roop.
Yeah, classic Roop, right? And so, and so he was talking about just colors themselves as symbols, and I see that a lot in spirituality. Even just the chakra system, right? Like the whole color spectrum, all the way from red all the way up to indigo. But I've heard some interesting things about.
You can only see up to indigo. That's cool.
I don't know. That's all that's on that chart.
Yeah.
Right. Look at you seeing gamma rays and microwaves and stuff. But yeah, back to the Mona Lisa just real quick, because I've heard people speculate all kinds of things. When you were talking about her being able to see you in any part of the room, it just made me think of Scooby-Doo eyes in the painting. But I've heard people say that like the smile, the Mona Lisa smile, is like a smile or recognition of enlightenment, and I liken it to the Buddha and the Buddha's smile and recognition of enlightenment. So I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. I think I've never been that impressed either. I've never really understood what all the fuss was about. But
it's a good example though too of that. I don't know how impressive the Mona Lisa would have been on its own if it didn't come with the Renaissance man that is Leonardo da Vinci. If you weren't like, oh, and check out, like he made a helicopter too out of wood. Did you know that? And it's like, okay, maybe there's something to this Mona Lisa, right? Even if there's definitely all sorts of things baked into it, no one would even care until it was like, okay, this guy has got something going on. Imagine all the dope symbolism that's been lost to time because that was like the coolest thing that dude had ever done, and nothing else broke, and no one cares to revive their artwork again. It almost seems like there's probably like thousands of forgotten Da Vinci's compared to the one that we know.
That's good. Yeah, I think that's probably a really good point. It's like yeah, you start to associate the artist with something, and it gives a little bit more of a halo effect around it. But let's get into the platonic solids. Can you explain what those are? And maybe we can talk a little bit about those dimensional symbols coming up from the 2D.
Yeah, well, I'll give, since we're doing surface level, I'll do like the most surface level version of it instead of breaking every one of them down, which I don't know if I've flexed this yet, but this is the manual to get. This is the Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly Palmer Hall. I don't know if I can get a better light on that. But you don't have to get this huge edition. This is a Diamond Jubilee edition, although I would 1,000,000% recommend that if you care about this is to go on eBay or one of the, like used bidding sites and just do an alert, because every once in a while you'll see one of these things come up for like 30 or 40 bucks and no one will jump on it because whoever listed it, it's like ending at 4 a.m. or whatever. So just over the last 20 years, I've just like, every time I see one that goes for less than like 30, 40 bucks, like there's no reason not to grab it. I stopped doing it, but I used to send it to any artist that I started working with. Be like, here, read this book. I don't know how many actually did. They probably just listed it back on eBay and I probably bought it back from them
for 30 or 40 bucks.
But yeah, they're making just pure profit off of it. But there's a great chapter where they're describing platonic solids, but I think the the way that I've come to understand platonic solids is that in 2D symbolism that we're talking about before in cave paintings, essentially, it kind of boils down to the most crude version of cave paintings. Once someone tells you that's a horse, those are boobs, that's a spear, like you can kind of always see that now when someone draws a little, a triangle with a red dot on it. Oh, that's a bloody spear. I got it. And you don't have to learn that again. But it still requires sort of like a visual cue. And I don't think that you can jump right into the abstract. So I compared the circle and like a sphere, right? So a platonic solid, if we go with like a platonic sphere, the deep version of this is that nowhere in nature do we even know what a perfect sphere would look like. As far as I can tell, of all the people I've talked to and the research I've ever done, I don't think there's such thing as an actual perfect sphere. Because if you zoom in far enough on anything that looks like a perfect sphere, you're gonna find a little dimple somewhere, or if you measure the exact curvature, if curvature even exists, which might be a conspiracy in itself. But if you analyze that, it's not going to be like exactly to the math that we got. So either our math is wrong or the concept itself. But the premise of a platonic solid is that every single shape and object and even symbol that we ever see is never like the thing. It's kind of like missing the forest for the trees when someone's like looking at a map, and that's basically like if you're too close to a thing, all you know is that there's like 8 trees around you at all times, and that's as much as you know. But if you had a map, or if you had a bird's eye view looking down, now you realize, okay, there's actually a forest here and the trees end over there and there's a river over there, but you wouldn't know that if you're too close to it. So in that same way, if you're just like looking at symbols as the things that are coming through your eyeballs through a TV screen or a painting or billboard or something, like you're staring at trees and you're not even going to realize that there's like a forest out there. So the first step is even knowing what a map is, right? Or what an aerial shot is. Because if you were had never seen an aerial shot, had never seen a map, you just been living in trees your entire life, and I come up to you and I'm like, dude, this is you, the mall sort of like directory, like the big X, like you're here, and all these little green dots, like that itself is a symbol. Even if it was an aerial photograph, you might have never seen a tree from up in the sky, so you'd have to have someone explain that. So anyways, the premise here is that you have to know both what a tree is, which is the easiest thing, but then you got to know what the forest is like. So that's how I've interpreted like a platonic solid. So you might know what a circle looks like. You might know what a drawn sphere or a 2D representation of a 3D sphere is. But the real version of that is a perfect version. So that in itself is such a potent symbol of like a perfect circle can't exist unless it's like a badass reggae group, right? Isn't that the Bad Boys song? But the perfect circle, like when we see one drawn or we see the representation of one, like you don't have to do any legwork and be like, oh, it's not perfect. You just immediately think of a perfect circle. And I guess that's sort of that next level of once you realize that every circle you see, every square, every cube, everything you ever see is never the real thing. It's never going to be a perfect cube. And just understanding that delta between what a perfect cube would be and what a cube that you're looking at that looks like it might be perfect would be. And that kind of opens you up to all sorts of new perspectives and thinking, because now you're jumping between macro and micro all the time.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, I think a perfect circle, that's a Maynard band, yeah, from Tool. And that's what I think of, is a Tool songs or something similar. It's kind of like a side project, I think. But it's like, yeah, I guess that's
and
the whole.
Tool's loaded with symbolism, right?
Oh,
like
yeah.
That's their whole thing.
Oh, yeah. And the fact that there is no such thing as a perfect circle, I guess that's like the whole like paradox of the title or the name of the band, I guess, probably in itself, which is fascinating, right? Like we're going to study this thing. This is a basis to understand the world, even though this thing that we're going to use to understand the world doesn't actually exist. That's pretty funny.
Well, and it's so hard to understate this too. It might just seem like such an easy thing to say, like, oh, there's no such thing as a perfect circle. But like once you fully integrate that, it really extends to everything. There's no such thing as a perfect anything. And if you want to go into like a rational non-woo aspect of this too, if you get into like physics or even like quantum physics at like the molecular and subatomic levels, but this concept that if I were to, if we were to like shake hands or if we were to like give each other a high five, our hands meet to us, right? But if you were to zoom in far enough into the micro, they never actually touch according to Rockefeller science, right? But
Right.
that like the little electrons like push each other off of each other. So we never actually make real contact. If you take a knife and you cut something, it never actually makes contact with any of the things. Like it's all just a big illusion. Like your show intro is like, what is this, a joke? Like that's yeah, it kind of is a joke. Like everything that we see.
Yes.
So even if you're literally cutting an orange in front of you and you're like, yeah, this knife is cutting through this orange. No, it's not. Like that. Like it's symbolic. Like the knife, it looks like it's cutting through the orange and it's exhibiting all the things that you would expect if it were to be. And I'm getting a little bit like farcical here, but it's to kind of prove that point of
Right.
once you really understand that almost everything can be a symbol. Like even the things that you're like, no, this is real life. I'm actually looking at, I've actually got a glass here or something like, but they're all symbols at a certain point. And then like I kind of first mentioned that the real technology and the evolution of technology is how simple can I make this, glass? Can I just show you a line? Maybe not. Can I show you 2 lines? No. 3 lines? Actually, yeah. I think if I had 3 lines, I could make you think of a drink, especially if you were thirsty. My mind always goes into like, I'm going to sell you something because that's how I think that like modern symbolism kind of that's where
Really.
we use it now. It doesn't
Mhm.
have as much use as it did in the ancient world.
No, that's very true. It is essentially all pushing toward that. It's all about selling and getting people to buy. So I mean, that's
It's very
essentially
practical. It's
yeah.
an easy way to really integrate this kind of information about how important symbols are because like a symbol will literally make you spend money.
Yeah, yeah, it'll make you feel certain ways too, like if you're painting a room or whatever, they talk about it in that Tessarion thing, like red, I think makes you hungry, red, yellow, and that's why McDonald's and like Burger King and like all these other logos that are associated with food are often red and yellow. That's how they try to dial it in and just push the symbolism as far into the psyche as possible. But different colors evoke different moods. Like some people really hate yellow, but like green, or blue, they give off certain moods and vibes. You have like somebody come in and decorate your house. It's very important and it's very intentional what colors they're going to use and why and for what reason in different rooms. Like people are painting their nurseries for their kids, they think about all this stuff, and that's like the most basic thing. Color is not technically a symbol, but it's a symbol. As you said, everything is a symbol, and it may represent the thing of itself, or it might represent something completely different or have many other connotations depending on how we view it.
And color is a great topic on here when you talk about symbols too, because just like I was theorizing earlier, like who knows if the monad symbol, the dot and the circle, who knows if that has some kind of genetic memory built? Like we won't know. At least me and you, I don't think we'll ever know if that's baked into us versus learned. And the same thing can happen with color. But there is some evidence that color is kind of like a culturally enforced thing, like the symbols based on what context you're viewing it through. So if you were just in isolation, if you just grew up in the woods, right, and you never saw another person, and you saw the color red, that might not invoke any sort of anything for you. And one of those examples is when we had to do like big graphic design campaigns for Disney that went across cultural lines, right? Like we would have to make marketing and stuff for a movie that was going to be coming out both here and in Japan and in Europe. And there
Mm,
were some like very specific things that didn't really line up as much. Like for example, the color red, I believe in Asia, usually represents like weddings. Like people will wear red to get married. So the concept of like red making you hungry, it doesn't go one for one. So
okay.
it might not necessarily mean, and I can theorize on why that's been adapted. Maybe because um in the West, we adapt our diet to like a lot of red meat, at least originally. So maybe like the sight of blood, maybe that kind of, I don't know what that is, but it would
Interesting.
also turns into its own thing to where if you want to start a restaurant and you look around, you're like, all these guys are using red. I guess I gotta use red. So it becomes a thing. And this is almost like an unintentional mnemonic device where, symbols and colors and all these things can totally be used just for memory work, but it's also because like showing you just a color, I can make you evoke a certain thought. If you intelligently do, like for me, when I think of the color red, if I've trained myself well, I'll think of the number 1 because I correspond the numbers to the Roy G. Biv scale, right? Red, orange, green, yellow, indigo, violet, blue. So if you can train it, so now if I look at a McDonald's sign and I train myself to think of the number 1 because it's the first in that scale, it almost feels like I can like dodge a little bit, like I'm deflecting some of the programming that's like, you're gonna get hungry now, and it's like, no, you're just number 1, you're nothing, you know. But that, again, it's a way to like, when I see their symbols and they put all this effort into putting symbols all over the place, why not turn it into something that you're using for you? And I think as proof, the whole reason I'm even kind of harping on that is it's just proof that the symbol itself, I don't think ever had any power by itself. An upside down cross or a twisted Gamadian symbol, which I won't say the name of, but like all of these like evil, horrible upside down pentagrams and stuff, like I think it's really all culture that embeds it with all this power and all this like different sort of thinking. So it's never the symbols themselves. The symbols are just these awesome little like sticky Velcro pads that you can just throw stuff at and it'll just stick to them really well, and you can use that. And once a symbol becomes adopted at mass, now it's like you don't even have to know what it means anymore, and it will affect you based on what it means. Like if you had an upside down cross on your shirt and you just went and walk around in public and didn't know that it had that, like people will treat you differently. You will see a material change in how you experience the world, right? Just because of a symbol that you've adorned yourself with. So again, it's more proof, but it's not that the symbol's like causing them problems. It's triggering them. They're thinking of a thing and then they're associating you with that thing. That's kind of what symbols are, like up and down.
Yeah, it's kind of unfair. It's like, man, I mean, come on, dude. Why are you hating on my eyeliner?
It's just
You know
2
what I'm saying?
lines, like the ultimate.
Exactly, dude. But no, I agree. And so I think sigils, for instance, would be a good example of that. And there's a lot of, people who are into magic, chaos magic. They'll create a sigil, they'll draw it on a napkin, they'll charge it however they charge it, they'll burn it, they'll, do all these types of things. But that sigil is totally up to you how you create it. A lot of times I think the way that they teach you is to like write out whatever the thing is and then take those letters and basically just create a symbol with the letters in there. And then you create your own symbol, your own sigil, and that has its own meaning to you, for you. And you charge that however you do, or, do the chaos magic or do your ritual or rub one out or whatever it winds up being. And then you just, essentially use that symbol to put out whatever it is that your intention is.
That's a great one, actually. It's very like Crowleyan. I'm sure he didn't invent that, but Aleister Crowley famously like made his signature into a little masculine member with the little hanger-oners to go along with it, and that was the A, right? The A, when he drew out his name with the A in Aleister Crowley, became this like phallic symbol. But he was literally like incorporating this like phallic energy into just his very name. So if you saw it, or even when he himself was drawing it out, he's kind of like putting this into it, right? There's also the John Dee / like Enochian version of making sigils, and it's kind of the same thing, except instead of working letters or working little symbols into your signature, you would write out a word or your name in like a magic square, and then you would connect the words. I'm simplifying it, but you would like draw lines from one letter to the next, to the next, to the next, and then that would create this symbol. And obviously no one would really know what the hell that meant except you, because you had the secret magic square cipher that would show you what that meant. But it didn't matter. Once you created that symbol and you're like, that's me, that represents my name, you wouldn't ever have to see exactly how it was created again, because you've just through the process of creating it and looking at it and being like, yeah, I like how that looks. Now you know, like, that's my thing. And if you were to see it somewhere else, it would immediately have like a huge amount of power over you. Not in a mystical MK Ultra sense, but you'd be like the same thing in the painting you were mentioning before. Like, hey, how come that guy's legs are so big? Like, you would stop what you were doing and you'd pay attention to it.
Have you heard of the Ellis, the linking sigil? Have you ever heard of that thing?
No, you'll have to explain to me.
Okay, I don't know it too well, but it's a specific symbol. I'll actually do a little screen share here and show you. So the idea of this was that that basically this is a sigil that people would start painting all over the place, basically to just jumble the mind and make people like think about magic again. And so I kind of started looking into it, and I couldn't help myself but to think maybe people were just putting that out, as this like kind of red herring type of thing to sort of just trick people into thinking about thinking a little bit outside the box, or like or challenging them to basically wake up out of their sleep. But the idea is the linking sigil, it links things together. That it's basically like expressing unity, and also just a big part of the chaos magic whole thing. But a lot of these people will use that particular sigil that looks just like the one that I showed in a lot of different works of art, and then flash it here and flash it there. Now, I don't know what the true intention of it is. When I started looking into it, I was like, maybe this looks this. I started getting conspiratorial. I'm like,
Yeah, I want to buy Bitcoin really bad for some reason right now. I don't really get it.
exactly. Yeah. But it's interesting. It's kind of its own little cult. And when I started looking into it, and the people that are kind of hawking it, I started to notice that we definitely don't necessarily align in a lot of our values. But the whole idea of the linking sigil is basically, I'm trying to think like the best way. It's basically to just remind people of magic. That's the whole initial idea, that magic is real, and bringing magic back into the forefront so that people are challenged and their reality is maybe, it's a little bit jarring. And so all these things are linked together to hopefully bring people into a more magical. That's the original, I think, intent. But there's this like DKMU group. And I don't know, when I started looking into it, like I said, the values that they hold and share definitely don't really align with what I would think of as a, positive kind of impact on the world. But I just
Chaos magic. Is that basically what we're talking about? Just chaos magic?
Yeah, essentially. So, I didn't know if you had heard anything about it, but yeah, they call it like Ellis. Ellis is like the demon or entity or whatever that's linked to the linking sigil of Ellis. And, it's a bunch of people who got into this like movement or whatever. And what they say is that it's supposed to like bring magic back into people's psyches. But I don't know. I didn't know if you knew anything about it and might have a little insight.
I haven't heard of that before. And
Okay.
and the way that you described that, I think you could just summarize, like we wasted the first hour here. Like you could just summarize the whole thing as that symbols are reminders. The end. See you guys later. That's the whole episode. That really is it. But I think to the point I was making before about this specific Ellis sigil, unless someone sat down and told you, when you see this, you're supposed to think about magic and bringing magic into the world, I don't know if you would automatically come to that interpretation on your own. And if you started seeing it all the time, everywhere, like every day you saw it 3 or 4 times just randomly, I still don't know if you would ever be like, oh, I get it, magic. I'm supposed to think about. I don't think that would ever happen. Someone would have to tell you that. But now that you have told me that, if I ever see that thing again, it's going to be a reminder to think about magic. And because I don't have any other frame of reference for that particular configuration, it was almost like a warning electrical danger symbol combined with Cartesian coordinates. Like if you just combine those two, but I've never seen those two combined in that particular way. Just like some people might have never seen the Vesica Pisces. They're just like, wait, you can do that with 2 circles? You know what I mean? Now all of a sudden, every time you see it, those 2 circles intersecting are still real potent. So, but I don't know how many people would be like, oh, that's the virgin birth. Like the symbol had to be able to be put together first before any meaning could have been assigned to it anyways. So I think, again, that inherently kind of proves that symbols can't just automatically have some kind of power or have some kind of meaning until we put that on top of them.
Yeah, dude, that's really well said. Yeah. It's been a while since I looked into that. It just hit me as we're talking. And I actually wound up, doing a podcast on Patreon about it after I started digging into it. Cause like at first I was like, oh, this is cool. And then when I started looking into this sort of group and I got on Facebook, I'm like, wow, this is like a super weird politics and stuff like that. And I don't know. I don't really know, but I put a link to it for anybody who wants to check it out. It was kind of a movement, I think, that happened in the early 2000s and started right around then, and people are still into it. It's just different. So the whole idea of sigils and symbols, but I agree with you. Like we could sum it all up kind of right there. It's like whatever meaning you ascribe to it, that is the meaning that it has for you. There's not necessarily, and not that there couldn't be some sort of like subconscious meaning to things, but like you can change the way that you experience things. It's like Robert Anton Wilson would shift from vegetarianism to being a carnivore. And when he was a vegetarian, he would feel bad and guilty when he walked through the butcher aisle section of the grocery store. He's like, oh, and then when he became, started eating meat, all that would go away. And it's kind of funny how we can see ourselves in the way that we react to these symbols change. Because like myself, I remember seeing the Illuminati eye and I'm like, oh, it's watching us, and then later I'm like, well, maybe that's my internal eye, that the thing that I can visualize and then I can use to create my reality. And so depending on how you look at it, it's going to have different meaning. And, a lot of Christians and other people, not just, I don't mean to pick on Christians, but a lot of times will really be turned off by symbols and symbology when it's like, look, dude, like, I mean, everything all your stuff is symbols too. And like Bill Hicks said, you think if Jesus comes back, he wants to see a cross hanging around your neck. That's the last thing he wants to see.
Yeah, there's I can't remember. I think it's called Quarter Moons or something. There's a KRS-One sort of freestyle, and he makes a really good point that if Jesus was killed today, would we just all be wearing like little gold Glocks around our necks, right? Because it was like, because the symbol though evokes like a whole freaking story, right? Even if you've never read the Bible or been to church and someone is wearing a cross around their neck, it's more than just, oh, cool, 2 lines, dude, or oh, I guess that means like it actually breaks down a whole thing on somebody. And it's super powerful because that concept of like a good painting or a picture can speak 1,000 words or something. But imagine being able to boil that painting and those 1,000 words down into just 2 lines. And the Bible's way longer than 1,000 words, right? Or picture says 10,000 words, but the Bible. Imagine evoking the entire contents of the Bible and everything that goes along with it by just putting 2 lines together. So I think that that's a really good version of this. And I guess to wrap up a little bit too, symbols are reminders, and I think that another healthy way of understanding how symbols can work for you and how they're worked against you. But you're familiar with the concept of a memory palace, and I'm pretty sure that you are. But the general version, if we just did like the most basic version of this, is that you think of your childhood home, like, or whatever you remember growing up, and like the house you remember like running home to. You just think of that and imagine yourself running up to that front door, but blocking you from getting to your front door of this house that you remember so well is an enormous, like an 80-foot tall purple dragon, right? And just imagine that in your mind, that every time you want to go back to your childhood home, there's this big 80-foot purple dragon that's blocking your way. And if you can like train yourself to just keep thinking about that, now all of a sudden, if you see a purple dragon out in the wild, you'll think of your childhood home. And this is also like one of these memory palace techniques, is that if you want to do something mundane, like I got to go to the store, remember to pick up, these 3 items. Well, if one of those items is broccoli, right? Just some random mundane thing. I can imagine that as I go into my childhood home, my house, there's an 80-foot purple broccoli blocking my way into the front door. And it's such a ridiculous, over the top image that it becomes a symbol. It's the broccoli at that point is obviously not just regular broccoli. It's there to evoke like a very specific response. And the craziest part about this one is that if you don't like rethink of this, and you don't constantly use your house as your memory palace and go through it and keep switching things out based on how you need it, then you could like in 10 years from now, think of your memory palace and be like, damn, what's that broccoli still doing there? Like it'll still stay there deep, like buried deep within you. So in terms of symbolism, if you don't realize that there's symbolism being used to tell you like, hey, you're hungry, or when you see these golden arches, that means you're hungry. If you don't realize that, then you can just not see it and then all of a sudden see it one day and be like, damn, I'm hungry and I don't know why. And it really happened. Like it wasn't some weird coincidence or like a mystical feat. It was because that symbol got anchored into you somewhere to mean something, and you didn't put the meaning onto it yourself. Now it kind of has that power over you, and then just extrapolate that to literally every corporate logo, color, everything that you see anywhere. So it's tiring, but you can absolutely like reassign meanings to all that stuff.
Yeah, and dude, to the point of the memory palace, like that's how public speakers and stand-up comedians remember their sets. Like they literally have like rooms that they walk into that they're decorated in a certain way. It could be their house. And then when they pick up a certain thing, that's a certain joke or images, right? And so even a joke itself is really a symbol because it's like a shortened version of whatever the thing is that you're explaining or the implication of a certain thing. So whatever that is. And so, you know, getting back to the idea of like wearing something around your neck that means, you know, 6,000, you know, words or whatever. It's like maybe we just start wearing get rid of these commies and just start wearing helicopter chains. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, dude, honestly, that's such a great analogy. Like a good joke really is sort of like boiling down a logo. Like anyone that's ever worked in graphic design and had to do client work for someone that had never worked in graphic design, it's pretty typical for like a first timer, but they'll be like, okay, I want a logo and it's got to have, and there'll be like a list of like 200 things that have to be in this logo. And a truly experienced designer will be able to boil all that stuff down into just like a few very simple shapes and usually convince the client, like, you don't need all that crap, trust me. But really it's about the, what is it, like brevity is the blah, blah, blah.
Brevity
Yeah.
is the soul of wit.
It always takes me so long to say it, which means that clearly
not that brief.
Yeah. But that's really it. Like brevity is the soul of wit, the same way that a good joke is boiling down a story that might take someone 2 hours to freaking pump out. If you can knock it out in like 60 seconds or something and really tell it, it's no different than a really potent symbol that we don't need to have Jesus hanging on the cross with the crown of thorns and like all like his the ripped, you know, six pack, and like you don't necessarily need all that if you can boil it down into just 2 lines. And it's not even like you're skipping steps at that point. You're not even lazy. You're making it way more potent because now if someone sees those 2 lines together in that particular configuration, but it doesn't have the J-man ripped, you know, hanging up on it,
right.
Now it can mean way more than that. It can mean that thing and endless other things that people assign to it. So like and that's why all the most potent symbols are usually like very, very simple. And if you get into like deep in the graphic design work, there's some people that'll overlay a symbol on like graph paper and you can see it's just a bunch of circles at like exact angles from each other.
Yeah. That's, dude, they call comedy writing shaving syllables. That's literally what it is. It's like you know, my friend Adam, he's kind of like got this super long delivery, right? And so, you know, in order to encapsulate his style of comedy, I could say, well, it's kind of long and it's when it kind of trails off and it's kind of droll and it's that, or I could just say his style of comedy is comedic edging. And then that two word phrase describes his style of comedy in 2 words. Like the 2-word jokes, those are the best ones because it describes the essence of the thing in the least amount of sounds out of your mouth. So I think that's a really good analogy to make. And I mean, joke writing itself is an ancient art form. Like it's taken me, and I mean, some people have a natural ability, but it's like it's something that you really have to work on to be good at. You know, it's not something that really comes naturally to everyone, and not everyone who's a great comedian is necessarily a great joke writer. Not everyone's up there just joke one-liners, but everyone is trying to get to that punchline as quick as they possibly can, because the longer it takes, the more the audience's attention you're going to lose. So you want to literally just get to the implication, get to the symbol of the thing. What is the meaning of it and how to demonstrate that, and create an image in the mind and then create an image in your mind as a comedian so that you can remember your set. Like literally, like images are the thing that make you remember what the next joke is. So when you're going through that memory palace in your speech, that's literally what you're doing, is you're like going through and you're seeing an image, and then you're seeing the next image, and you're going through your house or however you designed it. That's literally how they teach you to do it in Toastmasters.
I love the idea. If this isn't already a religion or a theory, then I'm going to go ahead and just coin it here and trademark it and do all the things. But like, what if after you die, you go up to, you know, the pearly gates, or whatever, and St. Peter's up there, but he's like, all right, now tell me the joke. Like, you had, you know, whatever, 70 years to live life. Now deliver your entire life as a joke that makes me laugh. Otherwise, you're going to go back down and you get reincarnated again. Because really, that would be like the ultimate masterclass. If you could summarize your whole life as a joke, that would be self-defeating, right? It would show ultimate comprehension. It would show humility. It would show the ability to suppress ego. It would show like a deep understanding of symbolism, because the ultimate joke and punchline, you have to let the audience put all their meaning into it. Like, you're just kind of giving them the template and letting them assign, like, oh yeah, that's kind of like this thing that I went through this one time. Wow, that's funny to look at along these lines. Like, you can't tell a joke to a bunch of people that have never experienced the thing that your joke is about. So you're always playing on them. And again, like, a symbol is a reminder. A joke is really kind of a reminder.
Dude, exactly. I love that. I want to hear people, guys, if you can think of your life's joke, please send it to me. I want to know so bad, you know. I've been fucking around with a chicken cross the road joke. I've got a couple of different, you know, versions, because, you know, I'll be outside, you know, downtown, like a sidewalk chalk, and I hand out flyers. I'm just like trying to build my brand, like guerrilla comedy, Athens comedy shit. And like, people will come up to me and all the time, oh, you're a comedian?
Tell me a
joke. Exactly. Every single time. So like, what I've done is I'm like, oh, well, why did the chicken cross the road? And they're like, I don't know why. And I'm like, some asshole asked them to tell them a joke. And then I just walk. You know, dude.
That's good.
But yeah, I want to hear people's lives joke. I love that. I think that would be like, that's the ultimate, right? Like, you get up there and there's all those St. Peter's jokes. And you get up there and you tell him your joke. And I think that's beautiful. And if anybody has anything to share, I think it would be so fun to hear. I'd love to hear your joke, whatever it is that encapsulates your experience. I'm going to think on it too, because that's a great little meditation right there.
Well, and you have to do it on your deathbed, and you might even be going like real slow and painful, like, so it makes it even harder at that point to have a good humor about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. People are launching them in the chat. That's dope. But yeah, that's a beautiful spot. I think we'll end there. I've got to run actually and tell jokes. I got to go tell some jokes. And I know you're busy and having at it, dude. I really appreciate you taking the time, Thomas, to come and chat with me.
Always.
Dude, can you tell people what your next project is, what you're working on, and where they should go and check it out?
Yeah, I might be in like a transition of sorts. I don't know, man, because I spend lots of time, literally the last 2 decades, working on comic books, games, artwork, music. You can find all that at paranoidamerican.com. I've got a comic book right now that's ending a crowdfunding campaign in the next 30 hours at nasacomic.com. It's about Stanley Kubrick directing the moon landings. It's awesome. It's seriously like the funniest comic that I've been able to create to date. Lots more lined up after that. But the transition I mentioned is like, I've been spending time, like, I don't know, 15 minutes making like a meme and using AI to just do like whatever's in the news, whatever weird picture is making the rounds on Twitter. And I just AI-ify it. Yeah. And bro, like, these things are getting traction that I wish I was just getting 100th of the traction on the things that I've been spending 2 decades working on. So maybe I'm just going to transition to just doing AI memes primarily, and then like I'll moonlight as producing comics.
Fair enough, dude. I mean, that's one thing that creators say. They're like, you're never going to be able to guess like what people really, you know, take and what goes kind of big or whatever. I've seen a couple of those memes actually. Like what is the Olympic? Is that a tennis player? I miss everything. I just catch the memes.
The Australian Olympic break dancer who's been making the round, because her routine itself is just crazy. But I just took a screen cap of one of her poses and I basically made her trying to avoid falling into a hole that goes directly to hell. Like, a hole opens up beneath her, and she's doing everything she can not to fall into it. And it just looks so, and it cuts right when some guy like walks through a wall and like a third leg sprouts out. And like within a half second of that happening, it just ends. So a lot of people like, what the hell was that? And they watch it again. And again, it took like 15 minutes to put all that together, and I'll spend 8 years on NASA. It took, like 5 years. Now, granted, I'll be pushing this NASA comic for the rest of my life. I hope I'm not pushing these AI, like this exact AI meme of the Australian breakdancer in like 20 years from now, but we'll see.
Well, everybody, I put that link in the chat as well, but definitely go check out paranoidamerican.com and check out the comic book. It looks like it's doing pretty well, and
doing great. I'm really happy with that. It's a huge success, and we're going to be able to put out like really cool like hollow foil versions of it and stuff.
Okay, Jenny G has a request for AI meme, JD Vance and his
Oh,
Yale
that's
photo.
awesome. Yeah, I'll do that. I will 100% do that. I mean, hugging and kissing is like where I always go because people always want to see. But is there anything else that they should be doing? Like, should they be like punching each other, high fiving? I don't know. If you got any great ideas, I'm open to them. Yeah, hit me up. Follow me on Instagram or TikTok or all the places. Paranoid American. Some places it's Paranoid America without the N. But find me, message me, and I'll make whatever memes. I'll make your dreams into memes.
That's awesome, dude. He's making memes come true. And yeah, thank you guys so very much. I got the Instagram link also in the show notes, as well as paranoidamerican.com, the website. Go and check it out. And thanks so much for hanging out in the chat. What a lively chat. Thank you guys for kicking it with us live. Y'all are amazing. Much, much love. I will have an episode airing next week with Dawn. Oh, I forgot her last name, but she talks about what really makes you ill. And it's a fascinating episode. I had to record it to make sure we didn't, set off the YouTube triggers and such. So I'm tired of dealing with that. But thank you guys so very much for being here and hanging out. Much love. I got some big announcements coming up as well. So stay tuned for that. I'll have a new video out this week also on the channel, talking a lot about these levels of consciousness from David Hawkins' work, Power versus Force, if you're familiar with it, and trying to bump ourselves up into those levels. I'm learning a lot. I'm risking my reputation to learn a lot about shifting into different states of consciousness. So please at least watch the videos. You know what I mean? They're going to be entertaining, and hopefully they doesn't blow up in my face. Much love, everybody. Really appreciate you guys. Y'all are awesome. We'll see you soon. Peace out. Have a great day.